Songwriting. Over many years I have written songs. None of these songs have been hits or even attained minor celebrity, and yet I have accumulated a collection of pieces which have been received, I think, well enough within a variety of informal settings. Mostly I've sung them as a floor singer at folk clubs. In his 1988 album I'm Your Man, Leonard Cohen reflected on his own place in the hierarchy of contemporary song. I said to Hank Williams, "How lonely does it get?" Hank Williams hasn't answered yet, but I hear him coughing all night long. Oh, 100 floors above me in the Tower of Song. There can be art in songwriting. A great deal can also be accomplished by the exercise of more prosaic skills. And if your object is to entertain first yourself and then just maybe a few friends, my advice would be have a go. You too may be able to find your place in the Tower of Song. In primary school, I remember being invited when I was about 9 or 10 to write a poem. A poem, in my mind, was something that rhymed, and for whatever reason, this task was something I felt confident I might be able to accomplish. My memory is that whatever I wrote on that occasion met with the teacher's approval, but perhaps more importantly, also impressed my classmates. I'm not quite sure where my confidence came from, but I think I knew instinctively not to always go for the most obvious rhyme. And then there was also the question of phrasing and an awareness that a modification of phrasing might be more pleasing. I continued to write poems from time to time, mostly directed at the school magazine. The writing of verse was never to mature into anything that might properly be called poetry, but as I became mildly obsessed with the popular song of the era in which I was coming of age, that would be the 1960s, and started to learn after a fashion to play the guitar, the idea of writing songs was never far from my mind. Yet I knew somehow that this was a greater challenge than getting a poem in the school magazine. The standard set by my heroes was high. Bob Dylan, the Beatles, Leonard Cohen, Van Morrison. The fact that there was something going on in the work of these artists that was beyond my grasp did not stop me from having a go. But unfortunately, of that early work, nothing remains. The world of popular song in the 1960s was dominated by young men, yet one of the first songs I learnt was Universal Soldier, written by Buffy Sainte-Marie. In 1971, Carole King emerged into a solo career from the obscurity of 1960s Tin Pan Alley, where she had been turning out hits with her then husband Gerry Goffin. And then, of course, there was the peerless Joni Mitchell, who properly came to my attention with the release of Blue in 1971. So women could be songwriters too, as has become increasingly apparent. Looking back, I think my initial stumbling block was a desire to write songs without first having any ideas which might form the backbone of a lyric. Unlike Paul McCartney, I couldn't rely on a great melody to carry me forward. McCartney woke up one morning with a tune in his head to which he initially sang Scrambled Eggs. This was to become Yesterday, with a melody which somewhere or other I heard compared to anything Schubert ever wrote. My songs were always lyric-led, and my guess is that is the case for many of the songwriters I most admired. In particular, Leonard Cohen or Bob Dylan. Certainly in his early songwriting, Dylan sat at a typewriter to compose. The accompaniment was a secondary consideration. With Joni Mitchell, I just couldn't say what her method might have been. Perhaps some co-evolution of music and words. Van Morrison, I imagine evolving a song as if out of a chrysalis composed of sounds and words. But who knows? The point really is that songwriting methods rely very much on the strengths, weaknesses, and particular abilities of the individual. Elton John worked with Bernie Taupin, from whom he received lyrics in the post, which he turned into Tumbleweed Connection, an album which I reverenced in the years before Elton veered off in a direction with which I felt a lesser connection. But there is more to it even than that. I recall listening to a YouTube interview with Bob Dylan. He was asked about the origins of the songs he was writing in the 1960s. I am assuming in particular the period of Bringing It All Back Home, Highway 61 Revisited, and Blonde on Blonde. One does not necessarily expect Dylan to offer straightforward answers to such questions, but his response was, I think, revealing. I paraphrase, "I don't know where those songs came from." Dylan doesn't say it, but he hints at something mystical going on in his compositional style. Perhaps, given the times, a few drugs may have been involved, though I don't really believe drugs or alcohol are a wise accompaniment to creativity, even if F. Scott Fitzgerald did succeed in writing his masterpiece, The Great Gatsby, in a state of inebriation. I think it might have been in the first volume of his autobiography, Chronicles, published in 2004. The world is still waiting for the second volume. That Dylan recalls going to see Buddy Holly on January the 31st, 1959. In one telling of the story, Dylan was in the front row of the concert. He recalled, "I was 3 feet away from him, and he looked at me." Dylan seems to hint that something like the spirit of popular song was passed in that encounter directly into his stewardship. Adding to the potency of this myth is that less than a week later, 3rd February 1959, Holly was killed in a plane crash, along with Richie Valens and the Big Bopper, J.P. Richardson. The day the music died, as Don McLean was to put it in his song American Pie. Well, you can believe that Dylan myth if you want to, but I am more persuaded by the fact that Dylan's love for American popular song in all of its forms is deep, and his knowledge of American popular song is encyclopedic. Anyone who listened to Dylan on his Theme Time radio show, which aired from 2006 to 2009, will be aware of this. Much of his creativity comes from an ability to synthesize and blend all of this raw material with his own distinct, indeed mercurial view of the world. We can't all be Bob Dylan, but there is a lesson of openness to musical genres that we can all learn something from. There can be no doubt, however, that Dylan relies on a level of instinctiveness in his writing, and may even be wary of overworking his material. In May 2008, Mark Lawson interviewed Leonard Cohen for the BBC Radio 4 arts programme Front Row. I believe it was during the course of this interview, not currently available on the BBC iPlayer, that Cohen told the story of meeting up for lunch with Dylan when they were both happened to be playing in Paris. Over their meal, Dylan spoke of his admiration for Cohen's song Hallelujah, which at that time was not particularly well known or fully formed. In return, Cohen said how much he liked the Dylan song I and I. Dylan expressed an interest in how long it had taken Cohen to write Hallelujah. It's a song which, in fact, Cohen had worked on over an extended period and for which he had written many verses, unable to decide on a finished version. It was only with the help of editing from John Cale, formerly of the Velvet Underground, who had presumably heard Cohen perform an earlier iteration of the song, that the version which was to become so well known was laid down. Having provided his answer to Dylan's question, Cohen then asked in return how long it had taken Dylan to write I and I. 5 minutes was the reply. Was this an entirely honest answer? Who knows, but the point really is that instinct, inspiration and impulse all have their place in writing a song, but in general, and for most of us who aspire to the craft, work is also required, and then there can also be the problem of knowing when the deed is done. In my own case, I don't generally set out to write a song. Rather, I am struck by an idea which I can see could be turned into a song. For me, narrative is important, and this is expressed in two distinct ways. The first being a matter of considering a range of perspectives in the chosen theme. In the late 1970s, I spent an evening with some friends, and a story was told about a social occasion where the host had introduced the novelty at that time of a games console. I thought that story could make a song. I was visiting with some friends. The atmosphere was kind of lame until the host jumped up and said, "Let's get out the electronic games." I began to think of other contexts in which electronic games might be introduced. Out at a party, people shuffling round. Just then somebody cried out, and I knew what they had found. The atmosphere was suddenly electric as we fought for control, and everyone was queuing up for some of that electronic soul. You get the idea, I am sure. The song wrote itself on the basis of the original idea. 6 4-line verses tumbled out. I played it to a few people, and though no one said anything as encouraging as, "That's a hit," it was a source of amusement, and once or twice people have even requested that I play it. I couldn't really ask for more. At the time I wrote Electronic Games, I believed for a very brief period that I had cracked this songwriting business and might be able, more or less, to write to order. But that was about as close as I ever got to Dylan in the 60s, and soon enough I had to accept that for me, patience was necessary. I had to wait for lightning to strike. This said, my brief period of creative fertility had its roots in something that was for me a songwriting breakthrough, namely punk rock. Not that I ever wrote anything with the recognisable rawness of a Sex Pistols or a Clash song, but I saw the importance of a struggle, the importance of a simple and direct approach. Punk rock opened a space in my mind for a songwriting method which allowed humour and irony to find their place alongside the song's central idea. But what was my songwriting method? Before I digress on that topic, I should mention the second type of narrative which can structure a song for my songwriting, certainly, and put simply, that is a story. When I moved to Dumfries in the 1960s, I started getting up to play as a floor singer at the local folk club in the warm-up for the main act. I began to realise that a longer form song which told a story might go down well in this context. That was the origin of a song which I called Dogman, which I wrote after giving a young hitchhiker a lift from Cumnock in Ayrshire down to Dumfries. My passenger told me his life story in that journey, how he had left school at 16, gone through a training scheme, ended up unemployed, and then found his way into the dodgy but fascinating world of greyhound racing. When I dropped him off, I could hardly get home fast enough to write out what he had told me. It felt as if I was transcribing his words, which, without a great deal of revising, were to form the text of the song. The opening verse. When my father died, I was only 14. A bricklayer's all he'd ever been, and I always said I would play the same part. But when the time came, I could not get a start. The original version of that song had 11 four-line verses, including much detail of how races could be fixed and how the dogman could manipulate the betting odds in his favour. With the passing of time, a little like John Cale and Hallelujah, I slimmed the song down to a more audience-friendly 8 verses. But in the context of Dumfries Folk Club, my sense was that the full version was warmly received as a bold attempt at a song in the style of a traditional ballad. For me, a critical device in the writing of a song is the use of rhyme, and the greatest pitfall is to reach for the most obvious rhyme on the assumption that inspiration has offered you it as a gift. Most of us know that if our opening line ends in the word moon, we should probably not be coming up with a following line which ends in the word June. I'm not going to say that it couldn't be made to work, for all the words in the 2 lines have their part to play. But the important thing is to consider other possible rhymes and ways in which they might be woven into the idea behind the song you're writing. This prompts consideration of a range of possibilities and the use of ingenuity to find ways of making a rhyme fit which did not initially seem to have a place. From this process, something fresh can arise, perhaps humorous or ironic, but above all, original. For most of my songwriting experience, I would just work through the alphabet to consider the possibilities of rhyme and half-rhyme which might serve. More recently, I have discovered RhymeZone, a website in which you enter a word and are immediately presented with a list of rhymes and near rhymes. If you can't make one of these work, there is always the possibility of reframing line A to offer a different rhyming opportunity in line B, and this too can open up ideas in the song which were not part of its original inspiration. When the lyric is complete, the challenge of creating a tune to which it may be sung remains. My approach to this is pretty basic and generally involves starting with a simple chord sequence in a major or minor key depending on the mood of the song. If I am pleased with the lyrics, singing it at even this vestigial stage can be pleasing, and this probably helps with the evolution of the melody the introduction of additional chords or experimentation with sevenths or major sevenths can be done by trial and error. In my experience, there's likely to be some evolution of the accompaniment in the coming week or so, which may continue beyond an initial performance of the song to whatever audience may be willing and available. Lily Allen, the singer and songwriter, tells an amusing story of how when she went into the studio to record her debut single, Smile, the producer at an early stage said, "That song needs a middle eight." Lily responded, "What's a middle eight?" The matter was explained to her. She withdrew from the studio and in a few minutes returned with a break based on a series of la-las. The song was duly recorded and went on to be a huge hit. I mention the story as it makes the point that what can be considered a finished song can still go through many stages of development, in particular if accomplished musicians become involved and add layers of arrangement to the original, which can, on occasion, transform it from something relatively bland to a spectacular hit. Would we remember Jerry Rafferty's Baker Street or Hazel O'Connor's Will You, were it not for the magic of the saxophone solos which were inserted into the arrangement of each? The acid test is when your song is first shared with others. Here, I think, caution is advisable. Friends are often polite in their response, but may also be dismissive or even caustic. They cannot see what you think is so good about the song. They can see what you cannot, its flaws. You have put them on the spot. They're just being honest. In these circumstances, you must be your own critic, neither swayed by bland encouragement or harsh judgment. Sit on the song for a while and give yourself the chance to stand apart from your very personal engagement with its genesis. Maybe at that point you will see the changes that need to be made, or perhaps that the song is not quite the masterpiece you felt it to be at the outset. However, if you continue to like the song yourself, that alone is important and should not be dismissed as a measure of its quality. Songwriting partnerships do offer evidence that the contribution of friends can be in alignment or complementary in ways that are mutually supportive of the end results, with that needed balance of criticism and encouragement or support. Lennon-McCartney, Jagger-Richards, or a somewhat under-celebrated favourite partnership of my own, Walter Becker and Donald Fagen of Steely Dan. They've all produced remarkable bodies of work. If you are part of a band, there must be a fair chance that a creative rapport can be established, probably one which shares out songwriting responsibilities between the complementary talents of the ensemble. If you're working on your own, however, you must strike a balance between believing in your own ability and critical self-reflection. It's an easy one to get wrong, and it is unlikely that every song you write will be a good one. I noticed that Alan McClure, who has been appointed Scotland's Screever for 2025, is an advocate of songwriting workshops. That may indeed be a way into the craft for many, though I feel sure that even in such a context, that it is the writer who can both believe in and critique their own work who will make the best songs. If songwriting workshops become more common, as seems quite possible to me, I feel sure that the quality of what is produced will improve. But so, in a world of already short attention spans, will the competition to be heard and appreciated. It is worth reflecting on artists who have contributed perhaps only a single song which has spread beyond the tight circle of their acolytes. I think of Dave Goulder's song The January Man, recorded by many artists including Christy Moore and Martin Carthy. I was privileged to hear Dave Goulder sing the song when he was the guest artist at Dumfries Folk Club. He did a set of well-crafted songs, but The January Man is the one that really stood out for me. Mick West, who recorded it in 1997, has called it a beautiful piece of poetry married to a wonderful tune. It is the dream of every journeyman songwriter that a piece of their work should be taken up and more widely appreciated in this way. But in the end, if all you achieve is to please yourself and a few friends at an informal sing-song, that too can be a reward. This video was written, presented and produced by me, Stephen Shellard. Just learning the trade, really. All of the songs I have written, including the two referenced in the talk, are available on my YouTube channel, Singing from the Floor, available at www.youtube.com/@Curruckin. If you do like any of the songs, please give them a thumbs up, as it may help others find their way there. Thank you.